Hi everyone. So about a month ago, I built a cheap low-power home server, and since then a lot of you guys have asked me how it performs, whether it works for me, and whether I think it's a good build. And so today, after a month of use, I'm actually ready to tell you whether it was worth it or not. And yeah, I'll tell you all about it in this video. That was my new intro, by the way. So a big point for me when I was building the server was energy consumption. Electricity is kind of expensive in Germany, so I didn't want to build a home server just to discover that I would pay more for it than I would for a VPS or something like that. And this was the reason why I didn't go for older hardware like Dell Optiplex or Xeon workstations. Even though they're really powerful and good for server use, they're not low energy and they're kind of hungry when it comes to electricity. I went for Athlon 200 GE as a processor, and the reason why is that newer hardware is, as a rule, more energy efficient than the old one. But I know you want the numbers, so there you go. The case I bought already came with the PSU. It was a no-name 300 watts or 350 watts PSU, and I was a little bit concerned about using a cheapo PSU because rule number one when it comes to building a PC, never cheap out on a PSU, but I wanted to give it a benefit of a doubt, so I took some measurements with the PSU that came with this case, and it showed about 28 watts in idle, which is not great, not terrible, I guess. But I wanted to make it even more energy efficient. So what I did is I replaced this no-name PSU, which is probably dangerous, with a Pico PSU. In case you don't know, Pico PSU is those very low energy, very efficient PSUs that kind of look like the laptop power supplies. They don't have a lot of electronics in them and they don't generate as much heat, and they're mostly passively cooled. So I thought it would be a better choice considering how the whole system is energy efficient, and it would definitely fit into 130 watts. And after installing this PSU and installing an additional 500 gigabytes hard drive, my system drew about 22 watts, which is 5 watts less. Even during the stress test, the power consumption didn't go higher than 45 watts, which I think is a great result. And considering the fact that this is a server, which means that the machine is pretty much going to run and idle most of the time, it would cost me about €1.80 per month to run, which is definitely much cheaper than a VPS with similar configuration. So one more upgrade that I did is I installed a passive cooler. Athlon 200 GE is not a very beefy CPU, so it doesn't get very hot. Considering this fact and the fact that I would like this server to run as quiet as possible, I thought I should go for it. So this is the cooler that I went with, Arctic Alpine AM4, and in theory should be enough to cool even beefier AMD CPUs like Ryzen 2400G. And after installing it, which by the way was pretty difficult, you just have to take the whole thing apart. I measured the temperature and it was idling at about 50 degrees, which is a lot, especially if you compare it to active tower style coolers. But if you keep in mind that it's a passive cooler and this machine isn't going to run benchmarks 24/7, I think it's good enough. I also did a little stress test, and after about 10 minutes of sustained load, the machine got as hot as 75, 80 degrees, I think, which is still quite okay. It's still in the margin of acceptable temperatures, in my opinion. And of course, the biggest advantage is that with the passive cooler, the machine is pretty much inaudible. It doesn't make any noise apart from the hard drive noise, of course. One more upgrade that I decided to go for is this 5¼ inch to 3½ inch adapter. As you might remember, this case came without a DVD drive, so there was just basically a gaping hole that I covered with a piece of black cardboard, which of course wasn't really aesthetically pleasing. So what I decided to do is I decided to buy this adapter, which basically will let me have an additional hard drive in there and also will take care of aesthetics. As I mentioned in the first video, I mostly use this machine for Plex. Plex, in case you don't know, is basically self-hosted Netflix. The idea is that you can legally obtain movies and TV shows and put them on your server, and then Plex will provide this very pretty, very fancy web UI to watch them conveniently, just like Netflix or Amazon. And before I bought this server, I used ThinkPad X220 motherboard as my Plex server, which of course wasn't very optimal. It was a mobile Sandy Bridge motherboard, which couldn't really handle a real-time 1080p transcoding. And this was the reason why I didn't go for something like Raspberry Pi or Rock64. Even though those single board computers are pretty power efficient because they're based on ARM, they're just not gonna cut it when it comes to video transcoding. But this new server that I built just works very good with 1080p transcoding. I haven't made any tests, and as far as I know, there isn't like a Plex benchmark that you can do in order to see how many transcodes your machine will handle. But I tried a lot of video sources like X260p, Blu-ray, 10-bit, what have you, and they all work just fine. I have never had any hiccups, any slowdowns, and it all runs very well, so I cannot complain about that. The machine also works very well as a NAS, as expected. I use it to store my backups and some of my footage for YouTube videos. For the backups, I use this 1TB external hard drive because I do a lot of distro hopping, and that usually involves DDing or rsyncing your entire hard drive, and it can be done pretty much without any problem on a running system. But if you want to restore the backup from the local network, maybe SSH or Samba, this will require some kind of effort if you're running from a live CD. So I prefer to have an external hard drive that I can detach from my NAS and just plug into my main computer or laptop. And this would also be faster than restoring over local network. So yeah, this is how I do it basically. And as for the operating system, I'm running Arch on my server, and there's nothing you can do about it. I use it on pretty much all of my computers, and I'm very familiar with it, so I don't want to use anything else. I also didn't want to use a NAS specific system like OpenMedia Vault or FreeNAS because I'm not only using this machine as a NAS. I also decided to make a retro gaming console out of it. I bought this huge CRT TV from Sony, and this is what I'm using currently for the gaming. Basically, I installed RetroArch on the server, and I use VGA to SVD adapter to get the picture and the sound to the TV. As for the games, I mostly play PS1 and Super Nintendo games, and Athlon 200GE handles them very well, which is of course not surprising since it's a pretty modern APU that handles some of the modern titles very well.
Don't shoot! I'm a human!
So yeah, those are the two things I'm using this machine for: retro gaming and Plex. I guess you could say it's a home entertainment system. Now, of course, this kind of setup is still far from perfection, and I would not use it to store any data that I deem very valuable since it doesn't have any redundancy. I am running Btrfs on both hard drives, but there's basically no redundancy or anything like that. So yeah, I'm definitely planning to work on some kind of redundancy system. I was also thinking about buying a second SSD for caching purposes, which I'm probably going to do if I have a lot of hard drives. I'm also planning to invest into some case fans. Even though Athlon 200GE is running pretty cold, even with a passive cooler, there are still other components in this build that generate heat, for example, hard drives and VRM, and I'm definitely not recommending you to run a computer without any active cooling whatsoever. So even though I haven't had any problems, I think it's still necessary to invest into some active cooling. So yeah, I'm really happy about how this build turned out, and if you have any questions about it, or if you have some questions about the home server that you want to build, just leave them in the comments. I also want to thank Joseph O, NeuroGamer, and everyone else who supports my channel. Thank you guys for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Goodbye.